I'm Heather at Umi Nami Farm, and it is September 10th, and we just wanted to do an update and show you what's happening at the farm right now. I'm currently on the far side of the farm, right by Rocky Point Road, and so you might hear a bit of car traffic in the background as I'm talking. The main reason I wanted to start here today is because one of the farm workers was showing us her garden the other day and really finding that she was having trouble where the seedlings in her garden weren't doing very well. And we discussed that it was probably actually to do with the trees growing nearby. And I wanted to show how here too, where we actually also have this challenge. Along Rocky Point Road, we have this really beautiful yellow cypress hedge. It's wonderful. It gives us a windbreak. It gives us a screen against the road. We want to have the hedge here. But we certainly really notice on these fields that where you have the effect of the trees, things just don't grow as well. So these plants here, this is kakina, which you might actually remember some kakina from some of our earlier videos that we did back in the wintertime. We direct seeded these ones middle July-ish kind of a thing. And you can see there's almost a line you can draw on the field. You can see there's almost a line where suddenly the growth starts to look a lot better. This is the zone, this poor growth zone is roughly the distance we'd expect the tree roots to extend. And indeed, if we dig in the ground, we find the roots of the trees. There's probably a big effect of the shade as well, especially in the morning hours. But I can certainly say digging in the ground there, you do find the tree roots. And so I have no doubt that's affecting things too. On this other field as well, this crop was transplanted. This is our tender cabbages. All the little ones and the big ones were all planted the same day. They all got, they're all on the same drip line, but you can see there's kind of a line where suddenly the growth changes from being very poor to very good. And again, that could be partly shade, could be partly, natural chemicals given off by the roots. It could also just be that the trees are drawing water from the soil and making it drier on this end of the field. But it's a real effect and it's there. And so it's the trade-off between the work the hedge is doing to protect the farm, but also we might want to start thinking about not planting this part of the field because most crops don't really do that well here anyways, kind of a thing. But all that being said, this is some of our work of the last couple months. Direct seeding the kakina was a bit of an experiment this year. Normally we transplant it and we spend the core part of the summer doing a lot of transplanting. This year we decided to experiment with direct seeding it. This was possible partly because we knew we had a good team who could do the weeding that we would have to do if we start with the crop being the same size as the weeds. But all in all, it's looking really good. I noticed anecdotally that in one of the farm workers' personal gardens, the direct seeded kakina did really well. And so we were hoping that by doing it this way, we could save on some potting mix. We could also have them establish a better root system and maybe be stronger going into the winter. We'll see what happens, but so far we're really happy with the result, thanks to work of a good team. So, the other thing that I want to show you while we're in this part of the farm, again, sorry for all the traffic noise going by. There's a few more things I want to show you while we're in this part of the farm. Let's head down and we'll talk about Daikon. So this, as you can see, this field is very long rows. These rock walls were put in by Tom, who some of you might remember Tom. He was one of the founding members of this farm. And he actually came through and terraced this field really beautifully. This is actually one of my favorite parts of the farm. So, part of why this part of the farm is really important to us is because it's higher elevation than the other areas. It stays dry in the wintertime, and so that means it's very valuable for doing winter crops. One of those is our winter daikon. This was our last daikon planting of the year. I'm going to open it up shortly and show you inside. Our last daikon planting of the year, we planted this August 19th. We have planted daikon later than that before, but it gets a little iffy as to whether it'll mature properly. So these guys, there we go, little daikons. These are only, what would that be, 2 or 3 weeks old kind of a thing. Oh, and there's a spider. Yeah, So these we anticipate harvesting kind of like November sometime. We might be able to keep some of them in the field, but we usually try to pull them all up sometime mid-November to avoid having them be damaged by frost. And then hopefully if they do well, we'll be able to store them. Now, this field in previous years has had a lot of weeds, a lot of grass. There is some danger that there will be more bug damage on the daikon. We didn't have another good place to plant them this year, and so this is what it is. I will be watching very carefully though, because if there is a lot of bug damage on this daikon, I'll know that this is not a good place to plant potatoes next year. I would really like to use this field for potatoes, so I'm watching very carefully. If the daikon come out beautiful with like less bug damage, yes, let's try planting potatoes next year. If there's a lot of bug damage, maybe not, just because they're affected by some of the same root pests like wireworm and stuff like this. I guess the cabbage maggot would go for the daikon and not for the potatoes, but still, it's a bit of an indication that if we have a lot of wireworm damage on these guys, there's no point planting potatoes next year. That's actually one thing I should mention is I guess at this time of year we kind of start to think about next year's crop plan. Like even if we don't have time to actually do office work and make a plan on paper, you just kind of start to imagine, oh hey, we're heading into winter, looking ahead to the next spring, what might we plant here next year? What kind of crop might be good to have next in the crop rotation? And that's something we really enjoy about this time of year. So I will come back later and finish putting this rime back on. This is partly to keep in moisture, partly to keep off the bugs, although as you can see there's plenty of holes. We actually had a raccoon, or a family of raccoons, I don't know which, who actually had a lot of fun going through this field and ripping big holes in the rime and digging up the soil underneath. So it's a little worse for wear at this point, but it's still doing some good. So, all right, let's also talk about kabocha. Kabocha squash is one of those ones that it's a lot of work to transplant, and it's a lot of work to put on the landscape fabric. We usually put down landscape fabric because it keeps the fruit clean, it keeps bugs in the soil from being able to get into the fruit. But the thing is, apart from the big work of transplanting and the big work of putting on the landscape fabric, you can pretty much just kind of walk away and leave it. Like I would come around a few times to turn on the irrigation and stuff like this, but you can almost just kind of walk away and leave it. So it's good for like a far corner of the farm like this where we don't need to come too often. But you can see they turn into these beautiful monsters. These branches, man, they're like, okay, it's kind of intertwined itself with the grass. But I mean, this is like at least 3 meters long from the plant until the tip here. Where is some fruit? Here we go. There's a nice kabocha right there. This is not ready to harvest yet. We usually harvest kabocha mid-October sometime. So what we've done now is we stopped watering these 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we'll let them dry down. And then when the stems get nice and corky and dry and the plants have died down, then we know it's time to come through and harvest them. I know normally we might start selling some kabocha in the early fall. However, this year we really don't have much kabocha squash. Like normally, like this field as big as it is maybe about 2/3 of the amount we would normally grow. And I'm seeing fruit, but I mean, I'm not convinced it's the best fruit set. As you'll remember, we had a pretty cold spring. We had some trouble with the seedlings, mostly because I messed up the water on the seedlings, and so we just didn't have as many seedlings as we wanted. So we're really happy with how they've done under the circumstances. It's just not as much kabocha as we would normally have. And so we'll probably be asking our customers to wait until a little bit later in the fall for us to start selling it. Kabocha is very important for us to be able to provide variety in the winter time. This squash, if you have like a room that's like, cool, dark, dry, you can store this until May and it's still edible. And so this is really valuable for getting whether a homesteader through the winter or getting a box program through the winter. This is super important. So because we have less squash this year, we'll probably be saving it to sell in the winter months when we need more variety. In the meantime, we have a different type of kabocha that if you're in the box program, you probably will see in your box from time to time, which is also really delicious. Okay, so I think that's about what I was going to say about kabocha squash. Why don't we go take a look at the eggplants? This is a really cool time of year because we get this kind of intersection of the summer crops still producing, but we also have, there's more of a fall feeling in the air. We're you know, we're starting to get things like, not this kabocha squash, but the Nihon kabocha squash, the other type that we grow, is starting to come available. And so you get kind of like, you start to get a taste of the fall, but a taste of the summer at the same time. While we're passing by, I'll just say, speaking of fall, we're not ready yet, but these are our cabbages for fall and winter use. This is not the tender cabbages that are good for salad. These are more for braising and this kind of a thing, but we've got like a Western red type. And then this other one it's a variety called Fuyudori B that we get from Japan. When might this be ready to harvest? We transplanted them about 3 weeks ago, and harvest probably October through November kind of a thing. We'll see how it goes. Last year we had a real failure with our cabbages. We didn't plant very many, and the ones we did plant, I don't know whether it was the heat dome or what, they just did not do well at all. So we had like the biggest cabbage was like about that size. I'm really hoping this year will do better. I'm being very careful this time to neither underwater them nor overwater them. We do, like a lot of farmers, we have problems with a disease called clubroot, which anything that's in the broccoli cabbage family, it'll just make the roots really like spongy and bulbous so that they don't absorb water well, and then the plants can easily die. And that has been a problem on that field in the past. The organism that causes it really likes wet conditions, so I'm hoping that if I keep it on the dry side, that the plants will still be able to survive, but the clubroot organism will be a little bit at a disadvantage, I hope. At the same time, I think part of the problem on last year's cabbage was that it didn't have enough water during the hot spell. So I also want to make sure these guys still have enough. So I just come and check every so often and poke my finger in the soil and make sure that I'm checking often enough to catch it when they do need water, but also not just turning on the water mindlessly and making sure I only water when they actually, you know, are starting to come to need it. The Eggplant Greenhouse is just around the corner here. This is not the same greenhouse I showed in previous videos, but it's one of 3 patches where we had eggplants this year. I'm just going to admit this one is a bit of a disaster. I know we should have put down landscape fabric to keep the weeds off the paths. Somehow that just never happened, and so this is a really bad situation with weeds and stuff like this. I want to show you this mostly just to be honest about the fact that not everything turns out perfect. And also, I just want to show you how the eggplants are getting older at this season. So I really regret, you see a lot of weeds here. We will be cleaning this out. What I'm thinking about doing is just chopping down the weeds, maybe watering and then covering with a plastic tarp in hope that the weed seeds will germinate and then die in the dark, so that way we're not reincorporating more weed seeds in the soil. We'll see. I've heard that something like that could help us to avoid just having this massive weed seed bank in the future. I talked earlier about how we start to think about next year's crop. What I'm thinking about for this greenhouse is maybe something like the Nihon kabocha, which is a type of kabocha squash that we grow inside the greenhouse because it needs warmer conditions. But it's something that we could grow with landscape fabric that would then, you know, cover the surface, keep the weeds from growing as much, as opposed to trying to grow like greens here, which would just end up needing a ton of weeding kind of a thing. So that's one idea for next year, we'll see. But that's one idea to kind of deal with the weedy situation we've got. But the real reason I wanted to show you this is not to talk about the weeds, it's to talk about the eggplants. Now these guys, if you had seen them a month or so, or a month and a half ago, they were just like lush, vivid, dripping with eggplants. This middle row is still looking okay. You can definitely see some nice new growth here. But you can also just tell they're looking a little tired. Leaves like this. And we're just not seeing as much fruit. We've got some flowers coming, so I'm hoping as the fall progresses we'll continue to have eggplant. We are harvesting them smaller now, just because at this season they can they're feeling like their biological clock is ticking. They know they if they're going to make seeds, they have to do it soon before the season ends, and so they tend to produce seeds at a smaller size than they would in the summertime when the plants feel like there's more time to do what they're going to do. So for that reason, we would try to harvest the eggplants at a smaller size when they're still more tender without the seeds formed already. Also, in the fall, with just, the cooler nights and the days shortening, I don't know what it is causes it per se, but the flavor and texture of the eggplant changes a little bit, and people actually call it akinas. It's like a fall eggplant that from the same plant just has a little bit different flavor and texture than the one we get in the summertime. And so that's actually a really nice seasonal thing to simply appreciate and enjoy as well. I suspect, going back to the plant growth thing, I suspect these might be looking a little bit more lively right now if we had gotten around to side dressing them. When I say side dressing, I mean providing either like some liquid fertilizer or some bokashi or alfalfa pellets or something to give some extra nutrients during the season, because these guys really gave a lot in terms of their production during the summer months. They're kind of tired now. If we had gotten around to giving them some extra food, I think it would have helped. But this is also just kind of part of the normal cycle of eggplant, where there's like a huge production, and then they kind of get tired, and then they have like a little bit of a rebound for the late summer, early fall kind of season. So we'll enjoy them while we can, but the end is near, kind of a thing. All right, so you can see this other row is a lot worse. I think that's probably because we didn't till the soil properly there. As I remember, the soil was kind of hard there, and I was like, oh well, whatever, we'll see what happens, and this is what happened. I can't prove that's why, I just think that might be why. So let's finish up with here. Before we head off for the day, I just want to show something that we have coming up next. One thing we really like to be able to offer in the fall is haksai, or Chinese cabbage. This is the time of year when we plant it. We've got the seedlings going in this greenhouse here, which you'll also see tons of weeds inside here too. One job that we'll need to do over the fall is coming and cleaning up some of these messes that happen. I think during the main growing season, we really have to just know our priorities. And our priorities are, harvest the crops there are to harvest, weed the places that have crops growing so the crops can do well. But these kinds of places, like this is a seedling production greenhouse, the weeds here look messy, but it's not going to affect anything too substantially. It would have been nice if we had kept this under control, but when we have to pick and choose, this was not a priority, so it got to be like this. But the more important thing is the beautiful seedlings. And so these are our haksai seedlings. We have 4 or 5 different varieties here, and the reason we select 4 or 5 different varieties is because they have different maturity dates. The shortest one is ready in 65 days, and then the longest one is more like 80 days. That way we can have a more steady harvest season instead of having everything ready at the same time. So these ones are getting to the point where, we're starting to see a little bit of roots in the bottom there. We might be able to transplant these guys by the end of the week, but we deliberately chose a cell tray with fairly large cells so that we could grow the seedlings a little bit bigger and then transplant them out. I really regret we didn't quite get some of our germination too well here, but these guys did very nicely. Haksai really likes a lot of nutrients, and so I've been watering these today with a bit of a compost tea that I made from bokashi. It's a bit of an experiment. We'll see if it works well or not. But when we transplant these, we'll certainly be applying a lot of bokashi in the soil before we transplant. Hopefully in a future video, I can show you when they've been transplanted and how we set everything up, and hopefully they'll be growing really nicely, and we'll be able to show you that as well. But this is another sign of the changing seasons. It's one of the big transplanting jobs we'll be doing now inside the greenhouse as we look to that change of the seasons. So that is a little window into what we're doing right now. I feel like there's a million other things to talk about, but maybe for another time. And so in the meantime, thanks a lot for joining us, and hope to see you next time. Bye for now.